The principles on which this society was originally instituted, and from which it has never deviated, the professed ridicule of moral virtue and religion, should seem to have proceeded from an utter disbelief of a deity.
It was here, at Belleau Wood, in the heart of Somerset, that the Dashwood family had its roots as merchants trading with Turkey. The youngest of three brothers, Francis Dashwood, later to become first baronet, married 4 times. His second marriage to Lady Mary Fane, sister of the 7th Earl of Westmoreland, bearing him 2 children, Rachel and Francis, born in 1708, eventually becoming 2nd baronet. It was this Sir Francis Dashwood and his future activities which have intrigued people for over 2 centuries. His father purchased the manor and rectory of West Wickham in 1705, and they have remained in the Dashwood family to the present day. Alan Brooks Palmer, a historian, has made an extensive study on the life and times of Sir Francis Dashwood, the 2nd baronet.
Sir Francis, on first sight, seems a conventional figure of the 18th century elite. His childhood and adolescence followed the usual pattern: university and the grand tour, a system used by the wealthy to subject their sons to the thoughts and artistic endeavours of other countries. The grand tour in 1726 was the first of many foreign journeys, and it was the second of these trips, starting in 1729 and continuing until 1731, which had an effect on Sir Francis that was to shape and colour the remainder of his life. He was then 21, a most impressionable age, and the liveliness and passion of Italian society, its paintings, and particularly its religious fervour, struck him with profound force. This deep impression stayed with him always, and it was kept warm and alive by the friendship of Giuseppe Mattia Borgni, a young Italian painter who later returned to England with him. Sir Horace Walpole, an acquaintance, tells an interesting story of how Sir Francis played a rather nasty practical joke on the congregation of the Sistine Chapel. On certain evenings the penitents scourged themselves for their sins. It was a symbolic action, the minimum of force was used, and this did not suit Sir Francis. Disguising himself as a night watchman, he entered the dimly lit chapel, and brandishing a horsewhip, he lashed out at all within his reach. The congregation screamed with fright, and there were cries of El Diabolo! In other words, the devil was there to punish them. At the age of 25, he travelled to St. Petersburg, where he is reputed to have impersonated Charles XII of Sweden in order to seduce the Tsarina Anne. History is silent on whether or not he was successful. Later he visited Asia Minor and Greece, which had a marked effect on his taste in architecture. In 1739 he again visited Italy, where he took a villa at Florence. He came home to run in the summer elections of 1741 and was elected MP for New Romney. He worked as MP until 1761, when he represented Weymouth. For 1 year he was Treasurer of the Chamber, and in 1762 he became Chancellor of the Exchequer. From 1763 to 65 he was Keeper of the Wardrobe, and from 1766 until his death, first with Hillsborough and then with the 4th Earl of Sandwich, he was Postmaster General. This brief summary gives an idea of his solid political achievements.
Severe penalties for minor offences made life very difficult for the poor in the 18th century. It was an era of great men. Gainsborough, Reynolds and Hogarth dominated English art. Lawrence Sterne was writing Tristram Shandy, Jonathan Swift his Gulliver's Travels. In architecture and landscaping, Robert Adam and Capability Brown were famous. Upon return to London in 1732 after the European tour, Sir Francis Dashwood took the chief part in founding the Society of Dilettanti, a club for the promotion of art and classical architecture. Clubs were fashionable, and among the most famous in London were the Kit Kat, Beefsteaks, White's, Books and the Divan. At the beginning of the 18th century there were numerous clubs bearing the name HELLFIRE, but it was Lord Wharton in 1720 who founded the most infamous of the HELLFIRE clubs, holding its satanic meetings in the cellar of the George and Vulture Inn, St Michael's Alley, Cornhill. The club flourished for just over a year, eventually being suppressed by a King's Order in Council for its blasphemous activities. It was later, in 1746, inspired by the surroundings of the George and Vulture, that Sir Francis Dashwood formed his own club, the Brotherhood of St Francis, and, together with two friends, Paul Whitehead and George Bub Doddington, held meetings in the cellar by the light of a Rosicrucian lamp, which was said to have hypnotic and magical powers. In 1748, the George and Vulture was destroyed by fire, forcing Dashwood to find a new club headquarters. Doddington owned La Trappe on the banks of the Thames at Hammersmith, and it is possible that meetings took place there for a limited period. Some information relating to the club and its members can be attributed to Sir Horace Walpole, a noted correspondent of the day, and his unusual Gothic mansion Strawberry Hill at Twickenham still remains. One of the more influential members of the Brotherhood was Frederick, Prince of Wales, and between 1739 and 1751 he rented the palatial residence of Cliveden. Frederick, Prince of Wales, son of George II and father of George III, wishing to escape from the public life he led in London, entertained his family and close friends at Cliveden, and it was here that the prince, whilst playing with his children, received a blow in the chest from a cricket ball, which, unknown to him at the time, was to eventually prove fatal. It is interesting to note, although not connected with the Brotherhood, that Dr. Arne's Mask Alfred, especially written for Frederick, was performed here for the first time on August 1st, 1740, with the sounds of Rule Britannia echoing across the River Thames to Bourne End. Travelling further upriver from Cliveden towards Marlow, we encounter a small group of islands overlooked by Winter Hill. In Dashwood's time there were 4 islands, but owing to erosion only 2 remain today. Records inform us that the smallest of the 4, Round Tower, was leased to Sir Francis Dashwood through Edward Sawyer, a Cookham land agent, for the purpose of fishing. According to 18th century maps of the Thames, Round Tower Island was very small, and it is therefore unlikely that it was used as a club venue. Continuing upstream from Round Tower, via Marlow and Hurley, Medmenham is reached, together with another group of islands. It was these tranquil surroundings which inspired Shelley to compose some of his poems. Within a short distance from these islands, Sir Francis Dashwood hit upon the perfect club meeting place, an old medieval abbey founded in 1160 by Hugh de Bolbec II. After the dissolution of all monasteries by Henry VIII, Medmenham Abbey was in a ruinous state until about 1559, when it was acquired by the Duffield family. In the year 1751, Francis Duffield leased the abbey to Sir Francis Dashwood for the club's new meeting place. In order to provide a romantic setting, Sir Francis made many alterations to Medmenham Abbey, eventually adding a ruined tower. Sir Francis was a radical Tory with strong ideas on administrative reform, and other members of the Brotherhood held various positions in Parliament. After an exhausting session in Parliament, one imagines them taking a private coach and speeding impatiently towards the pleasures that awaited them at Medmenham. At the Bear Hotel, Maidenhead, fresh horses were supplied, and the journey would continue through Maidenhead Thicket and on to Medmenham. Upon arrival at the river bank, a gondola would be waiting, and the members ferried across river to the abbey, where, according to Charles Johnston, an 18th century author, after drinking their spirits up to a proper pitch and dressing in milk-white robes, repaired at the tolling of a bell to the chapel, the scene of all their mysterious rites, and knocking thrice at the door, it was opened to them to the sound of solemn and plaintive music. Johnston went on to say that it was within the chapel that the new candidates were elected to the Brotherhood, receiving the name and character which they were to bear in the society, in a manner not proper to be described. Every the most sacred rite of ceremony and religion profaned, all the prayers and hymns of praise appointed for the worship of the deity burlesqued by a perversion to the horrid occasion.
The club, often referred to as the Brotherhood, the Knights of the Order of St. Francis, was an association of powerful members of the ruling class, Sir Francis being their founder and leading spirit. There were two categories of membership, superior and inferior. The superior members formed Dashwood's inner circle and were united chiefly by their dislike of popery, a strong satirical inclination and a love of agreeable women, who were supplied in adequate numbers and varieties to suit the equally varied tastes of the members. The superior membership consisted of Dashwood himself and his 12 apostles, totaling 13 in all. We do know from the club's records that the 12 apostles elected an abbot each year, whose role it was to organize the festivities, and for his trouble had first pick of the women. When the superior member died, or went mad, his successor was elected from the inferior group, of which there are at least 50 members. The competition for this honour must have been very keen indeed. Records inform us that the club's meetings, or full chapters as they were known, lasted about 1 week, usually in June or July. In order to avoid the fatigue usually associated with the excesses of wine and women, The full chapters were held no more than twice a year. Walpole, on the other hand, tells us that the brothers met at Medmenham for 2 days in every month. I expect these may have been casual drinking sessions rather than full chapters.
Let us go back 2 centuries to Medmenham Abbey and view the nocturnal revellers taking their pleasures among the grottos and statues bearing suggestive Latin inscriptions. During the European tour, Dashwood first read books by Rabelais, the 16th century French satirist. His scandalous and irreligious outlook naturally appealed to Sir Francis, leaving him with an unforgettable impression. Dashwood borrowed from Rabelais the motto of the Abbey of Theleme and had it painted over the eastern porch of Medmenham Abbey. It reads, Ves Cathedra, which translated means do as you please. And according to an anonymous monk of Medmenham, that's exactly what they did. The superior membership could well have consisted of these names. The 20-minute section that follows is extremely detailed and may appear rather tedious. Nevertheless, it is essential to a fuller understanding of the characters forming Dashwood's inner circle. Next to Sir Francis on our list of superior members is Sir John Dashwood King, born 1716, the Lord of the Manors of West Wickham and Holton. He was half-brother to Sir Francis and was elected superior member for this family connection alone.
He studied law and in 1753 became an MP. He succeeded Sir Francis in 1781 and died 12 years later, aged 78. On the 6th of February 1710, in Castle Yard, Holborn, was born a man who later was to become the closest friend Sir Francis Dashwood ever had.
At an early age, Paul Whitehead foolishly backed a cheque for £3,000 for a theatrical manager who was unable to meet this sum. Whitehead was then thrown into a debtor's prison, but later emerged as a satirical poet attacking the Whig government. In 1735 he married Anne Dyer, a half-witted daughter of rich parents. She purchased Colne Lodge at Twickenham, where they lived happily as near neighbours to Horace Walpole. In 1742, Paul Whitehead organised a mock procession through the streets of London, imitating the annual march of the Freemasons, and it was this inclination to buffoonery that appealed to Sir Francis, and Whitehead was quickly made steward and club secretary.
It was this position and Whitehead's political attacks that prompted Charles Churchill, an inferior member of the club, to write, "May I, can worse disgrace on manhood fall, be born a Whitehead and baptized a Paul?" Robert Lloyd, also an inferior member and friend of Churchill, said that Whitehead was a sedulous and patient seducer and veritable troubadour of blasphemy. This may have been so, for Whitehead composed most of the blasphemous and obscene hymns sung during the club's meetings. Dashwood soon obtained for his lifelong friend deputy treasurership of the chamber, worth £800 a year, Whitehead died on the 30th of December 1774.
Another superior member of the Brotherhood was John Montague, the 4th Earl of Sandwich. In point of fact, it was this Earl who gave his name to the sandwich. Both Dashwood and Sandwich visited Turkey together in 1730, staying at Istanbul. It is interesting to note that a club known as the Divan Club was formed from the results of this visit, and it flourished for just over 2 years, breaking up in 1746. Anyone who could prove that they had been in the Sultan's dominions were eligible for membership, and this portrait certainly substantiates the Divan Club's existence.
In common with Sir Francis, Sandwich had an intense dislike of popery. He was said to have preached burlesque and blasphemous sermons to a congregation of cats in a village church. He was described as being as mischievous as a monkey and as lecherous as a goat.
On his good side, he was a competent cricket player and musician, and had a passion for hard work. In 1760 he seduced a girl by the name of Martha Ray, educated her as a singer, where she entertained him at his Hinchinbrook home. She bore him 9 children, but 19 years later a renegade clergyman by the name of Hackman nurtured a hopeless love for Martha, shot her, failed to shoot himself, and was later hung.
Sandwich's parliamentary posts included First Lord of the Admiralty, Secretary of State, and Joint Postmaster with Sir Francis, 1768 to 1771. He died in 1792.
Another rather amusing character elected to Dashwood's inner circle was George Bubb Doddington, Lord Malcolm Regis. Born 1691, he was one of the more senior members of the Brotherhood, and was originally known as George Bubb. He took the name Doddington from his uncle, who in 1720 died, leaving George Bubb a fine estate at Eastbury in Dorset. He spent the fantastic sum of £140,000 on completing a magnificent mansion begun by his uncle, of which Vanbrugh was the architect. George Bubb also had a home in Pall Mall, and of course he owned La Trappe on the banks of the Thames at Hammersmith, which was in a prominent position to be used to entertain people of political influence. It could have been here that Dashwood met Paul Whitehead. In 1721, Doddington was appointed Lord Lieutenant of Somersetshire, and from 1722 to 54 he sat for Bridgewater, becoming Lord of the Treasury in 1724, succeeding Pelham. According to Horace Walpole, Frederick, Prince of Wales, played rough practical jokes on Doddington whilst at Cliveden. Doddington was rolled down the stairs in a blanket and thrown into the Thames in midwinter. The Prince borrowed £5,000 from him with no intention of repaying it. The fact is that Doddington was a sycophant and would do anything to patronise the aristocracy. Later in his life, he grew enormously fat and dressed in silk suits with lilac waistcoats covered in heavy embroidery. His grossly overweight body was the subject of much ridicule.
In spite of his obesity, he loved to play the romantic seducer. Once, when he was in the boudoir of a fashionable lady, Bubb exclaimed, "Oh, if only I had you in the middle of a dark forest." The lady replied, "What would you do there that you can't do here? Rob me?" Charles Churchill wrote of him, "Bubb is his name, and Bubbies doth he chase." This swollen bullfrog was lascivious face.
When George Bob Doddington died in 1762, Eastbury passed into the hands of Lord Temple, who vainly offered £200 a year to anyone who would consent to live in the palatial country mansion. But the great tragedy of it all was that nobody did, and in 1775 the baroque splendours of Vanbrugh were blown with gunpowder, leaving only the east wing remaining today. Another senior member of Dashwood's inner circle was Sir William Stanhope, second son of the Earl of Chesterfield. He was born in 1702 and was made Knight of the Bath in 1725. Sir William inherited Ascot House in Buckinghamshire from his father, but resided mainly in his other home at Ethrop House near Waddesdon, and spent large sums in decorating the house and grounds. Sir William Stanhope was Knight of the Shire for Bucks and held several public offices. He died in 1772.
Almost certain to have been one of Dashwood's superior members was Sir Thomas Stapleton, 5th Baronet of Gray's Court near Henley-on-Thames. He was born in 1727 and was the son of Sir William Stapleton, 4th Baronet. Sir Thomas owned land in Cookham and Bray, leasing Round Tower Island in the River Thames to Sir Francis Dashwood in 1776. Sir Thomas was second cousin to Sir Francis and died in 1781. Gray's Court remained in the Stapleton family until 1935. It is interesting to note that Sir Thomas's son, 6th Baronet, also of the same name, became Baron le Despencer in 1788 on the death of Dashwood's sister, Rachel Austen. In the year 1728 was born Francis Duffield, the 5th of Medmenham. This high-spirited man was a born soldier, and in contrast to his gallantry, was devoted to music and art. It was the latter which brought him into contact with Dashwood. Duffield was owner of Medmenham Abbey, and it was through his association with Dashwood that Medmenham Abbey was leased for the purpose of the club's meeting place. When the abbey was leased, the Duffield household removed to the nearby White House, and it was there that Francis Duffield died on 29th of May 1758.
Another superior member of the Brotherhood was John Stuart, 3rd Earl of Bute. He was born in Edinburgh on the 25th of May 1713 and educated at Eton with Sir Horace Walpole. On the 13th of August 1736 he married Lady Mary Wortley Montague.
Bute's political career was founded on purest accident. In 1747, Frederick, Prince of Wales, attended the race meeting at Egham, where a shower of rain delayed his return to Cliveden. An urgent message was sent round the racecourse for someone to make a fort at whist. Bute filled the gap, and from then on he became a firm favourite of the prince, and incidentally of the princess, whom he seduced. Bute was virtually given a free hand in the upbringing of Frederick's son, George, later to become George III. He often told the boy, "Remember, when you are King of England, you must be ruthless." George's attempt to follow this advice contributed to the American Revolution.
In May 1762, Bute became Prime Minister. He hated the American colonists. He destroyed the Whigs and ruined William Pitt. On the 26th of May 1762, Bute was made Lord of the Treasury, and on the following day Knight of the Garter. In 1763 he purchased an estate at Luton Hoo, in Bedfordshire, where Robert Adam built him a palatial residence with the gardens landscaped by Capability Brown. At Luton Hoo he formed a magnificent library, a superb collection of astronomical and mathematical instruments, and a gallery of Dutch and Flemish paintings. Since then 2 fires have occurred, one in 1771 when the library perished, and the other in 1843 when the house was destroyed, but the majority of books and pictures were fortunately saved. Bute did have a botanical garden at Luton Hoo, but he subsequently moved his valuable collection of plants to Christchurch.
In 1765 to 67, Lansdowne House was built for Bute by the Adam brothers, but he sold it to Lord Shelburne before it was completed. On the 10th of March 1792, John Stewart, the 3rd Earl of Bute, died and was buried at Rothsay on the Isle of Bute.
Another of Dashwood's close associates was George Augustus Selwyn, born on 11th of August 1719. His father was Colonel John Selwyn from Matson, near Gloucester. Selwyn was a noted wit and conversationalist, but it is thought that he attended the club's meetings chiefly for the convivial atmosphere rather than the attractions of the ladies. Selwyn graduated at Hertford College, Oxford, on the 1st of February 1738, did the Grand Tour in 1740, and retired to Oxford in 1744. But was rusticated in 1745 for an insult to the Church of Rome.
It was Selwyn's mockery of the Catholic faith that endeared him to Sir Francis, and of course his wit. For example, the father, son and grandson all shared the same mistress, passing her on from one generation to another. "There's nothing new under the sun," remarked some buck. "Nor under the grandson," added Selwyn.
He was notorious for his love of executions, and although evidently disturbed at the sight of human suffering, was at the same time fascinated by it. He rarely missed a public execution, and on one occasion was reputed to have bet a friend that he would not attend a certain hanging. On the day of the execution, Selwyn's urge was so strong that he dressed himself up as an old lady in order to avoid recognition, and rode up to Tyburn on horseback to witness the appalling scene. But being an honest man, he did not claim the wager. Selwyn even made a special trip to Paris in order to witness Damien's body being torn to shreds by horses for his attempt on the life of Louis XV. He arrived too late to secure a front row seat, but the executioner immediately recognized Selwyn and shouted, "Please let this gentleman through, my friends. He's a famous English amateur."
George Selwyn had a standing arrangement with undertakers to inspect the corpses brought into them. When Lord Holland was on his deathbed, he told his servants, "Should Mr. Selwyn call, show him up at once. If I'm alive, I'll be glad to see him, but if I'm dead, he'll be glad to see me." Selwyn never married, but he was very fond of children. He was MP for the family borough of Ludgershall and Gloucester. He died on the 25th of January 1791. The Vansittart family of Shottersbrook provided the brotherhood with 3 monks, Henry, Robert and Arthur, but of these Robert was the only superior member. The family is of Dutch origin and takes its name from the town of Sittard in Limburg.
Henry Van Sittart, born the 3rd of June 1732 in Ormond Street, London, was the youngest of the 3. and was educated at Reading Grammar School and Winchester College. At the age of 13, he joined the East India Company, and later he became a close friend of Robert Clive. On the 8th of November 1759, on Clive's recommendation, Henry became Governor of Bengal, and later, back in England on the 16th of March in 1768, was MP for Reading.
In 1769 he was elected Director of the East India Company and was appointed, together with Luke Scrafton and Francis Ford, to investigate allegations of corruption within the company's administration. The three supervisors left Portsmouth in September 1769 in the frigate Aurora. They left Cape Town on December the 27th and were never heard of again.
Robert, the second son, born 1728, was also educated at Reading and Winchester. Graduated Bachelor of Civil Law 1751 and Doctor of Civil Law in 1757, later being appointed Regius Professor of Oxford University in the same subject. He was on intimate terms with Paul Whitehead and the painters George Knapton and Hogarth.
Robert, a superior member of the fraternity, presented to the club a baboon sent from India by his brother Henry. It was to this baboon that Sir Francis was accustomed to administer the Eucharist at the club's meetings. Robert died in Oxford on the 31st of January 1789.
Finally, we come to Arthur Van Sittart. Although a member of the Brotherhood, there is no evidence that he was a superior member. It is rather interesting that all three of the brothers have been painted here as monks of Medmenham, wearing tam o' shanters bearing the club's motto, Love and Friendship. In view of the fact that Robert Van Sittart was a close friend of Hogarth, one immediately could draw the conclusion that Hogarth was responsible for these portraits.
Another of Dashwood's inner circle members was Thomas Potter, second son of John Potter, Archbishop of Canterbury. He was born at Cuddesdon, Oxford, in 1718. His brother married beneath his dignity, which offended the Archbishop. Consequently, he left all his fortune and personal property to the value of £100,000 to Thomas, who, by all accounts, squandered it on wine and blue swimming.
He graduated Bachelor of Arts in 1735 and MA in 1738. His political achievements included Secretary to Frederick Prince of Wales, MP for St Germans, Oakhampton and the Borough of Aylesbury, Paymaster General of the Land Forces in 1756, and Vice Treasurer for Ireland in July 1757, a post which he held until his death. Potter was a very close friend of Pitt the Elder and of John Wilkes, the 18th century revolutionary.
It was Thomas Potter who introduced Wilkes to the Brotherhood, and it was Wilkes, in collaboration with Potter, who were later accused of writing the Essay on Woman, a distasteful pornographic work parodying the Catholic faith. It was said that Potter was indeed Wilkes' ruin, who was not naturally a bad man. Thomas Potter is reputed to have said, "I poison all my friends' morals." After running through most of his father's fortune, he married a wealthy woman. He seduced the wife of the Bishop of Warburton, and she had a son by him. Potter had a morbid fascination for death, loved execution, and in common with Selwyn, had a passion for corpses.
After a long decline, Potter died at his favourite residence of Ridgemont in Bedfordshire on the 17th of June, 1759, and was buried on the 25th of June in its churchyard at the west of the belfry, in a place where no one used to be buried. His body was carried by 6 labourers and put in 3 coffins, one of which was lead. By his directions his body was dissected, and his lungs and liver were found to be in much decay. And finally we come to the 12th apostle forming Dashwood's inner circle, Giuseppe Matteo Boni, artist, born in 1701 at Craveggia, northern Italy.
You may wonder why an Italian artist should be chosen for a place within Dashwood's circle. Dashwood met Borgny during the European tour, where they formed a close friendship. Borgny's last recorded work in Italy was in 1751, and it was that year that he came to England in order to paint the ceilings at West Wickham House, West Wickham Church, and to generally reproduce so faithfully the whims and ideas of Sir Francis. In 1761, Giuseppe, during the course of his work, fell from a scaffolding and was killed, leaving the eldest of his 3 sons, Giovanni, to carry on the work. Let us look at the original list again. This time it shows the members' achievements in politics and the arts. Perhaps we could ponder on the contradictions in their lives, their orgiastic revelries as members of an order devoted to the mockery of religion, as opposed to their solid contribution to the world of affairs and politics. were the superior members, but of course this is not a definitive list, as the members, for one reason or another, left and were replaced by others. There is in existence the cellar book of the club, and on its cover is a puzzling picture showing buildings on an island. Could this be Round Tower Island? The book shows that in 1760 John of Henley, known to be John Clark, was abbot, and although not on our list, Clark at that time was a superior member. The pseudonym used underlined the satirical attitude the club had towards religion. Brother John of Magdalen was John Gwynn, Francis of Cookham, Francis Duffield, Brother John of Aylesbury, John Wilkes, and so on. The inferior group in the club included Dr. Benjamin Bates, Dashwood's doctor, Henry Lovibond Collins, poet, Sir John Daubrey, judged too young to be a superior, Sir Francis Delaval, Frederick, Prince of Wales, and his physician, Dr. Thomas Thompson, the Earl of March, known as Old Q, Lord Holland, Joseph Banks, botanist and president of the Royal Society, William Hogarth, and John Wilkes. I could go on, but the list is large, and this is just a representative example. Little would have been known about the club but for a book that was published around 1760. This book, written by Charles Johnston, was entitled Chrysal, or The Adventures of a Guinea, a satirical work revealing the club's location and activities. In addition to this, a political row was also brewing between those members who supported King George III's ministry and the opposing faction represented by the revolutionary John Wilkes, who had just published a pamphlet known as Number 45 of the North Britain, violently attacking the monarchy. To make matters worse, Wilkes dressed the club's baboon to look like the devil and released it during one of the club's services. Chrysal informs us that the animal leapt onto the back of Lord Sandwich, who ran out of Medmenham Abbey, shouting, "Spare me, gracious devil, I am as yet but half a sinner. I have never been as wicked as I intended." This chain of events caused the break-up of the club, and this is more or less confirmed by the cellar book entries. We have said nothing of the nuns, who played such an important part in the proceedings of the club. The problem is lack of information. I think it is fairly certain that the following ladies played these saintly roles. Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, member of the Divan Club, an old friend of Sir Francis. Mary Walcott, half-sister to St. Francis. Fanny Murray, mistress of the Earl of Sandwich, and Charlotte Hayes, brothel-keeper and purported agent for the club. Sophia Edgerly of Medmenham, Elizabeth Roach, mistress of Sir Francis, and finally Sister Agnes. Lastly, I must mention a strange visitor to Medmenham known as Charles Genevieve Louis Auguste André Timothée Dean de Beaumont. I was uncertain whether to include the Chevalier in the list of nuns or brothers. The fact is, he was a person of indeterminate sex. Baptized as a boy, he was brought up as a girl, and the ability to pose as both sexes made him an excellent undercover agent for Louis XV. One of his visits to Medmenham was bizarre. A jury of aristocratic ladies was organized to judge whether the Chevalier was male or female. After a long and earnest examination, the ladies confessed themselves unable to reach a verdict. Bets totaling hundreds of thousands of pounds were laid as to his sex, but as he was an excellent duellist and swordsman, no one dared pursue the matter to its conclusion. He stands as a symbol of the contradiction that seems so fundamental a part of the Brotherhood.
Travel by horse-drawn coach in the 18th century was slow and uncomfortable, the journey from London to Oxford taking almost 2 days. West Wickham village, with its numerous coaching inns, provided a convenient break in the arduous journey. The village remains virtually unaltered to this day. Just south of the village is West Wickham Park, and situated in the grounds is the home of Sir Francis Dashwood, West Wickham House, one of the finest examples of Palladian architecture in the country. He inherited the manor house of West Wickham on the death of his father in 1724, and throughout his life continued stage by stage to make many structural changes to the property. The double colonnade on the south front, designed by John Donowell around 1754, is one of the most striking additions. Nicholas Revitt, the architect, was later commissioned to design a number of curious garden buildings, including the Temple of Apollo, which doubled as a pit for cockfighting. He was also responsible for designing the Ionic West portico, built around 1766. The ceilings were later painted by William Hannon. On the opposite end of the house, the east portico, designed in the Doric style, has also been attributed to Revitt. Work on the grounds started in 1735. A few years later, Thomas Cook, a pupil of the famous Capability Brown, re-landscaped West Wickham Park to Sir Francis Dashwood's specification. Around 1752, extensive alterations were underway, and these included blocking the River Wye to form a large lake. interior of West Wickham House also contains many surprising features. The entrance hall with its mahogany staircase is truly magnificent. There are paintings by Hogarth, Zoffany and Romney. The Brussels tapestries cover the walls of the tapestry room, and the painted ceilings in some of the main rooms are fine examples of the works of Giuseppe Borni and William Hannon. In June 1745, Sir Francis Dashwood married Sarah Ellis, widow of Sir Richard Ellis of Nocton, Lincolnshire. Sir Richard had no children, and Nocton Hall was left to Sarah for the rest of her life. Dashwood's marriage gave him an interest in the property, and whilst in Lincolnshire he bought other properties in the neighbouring village of Dunstan. In 1751, about 2 miles west of Dunstan, Sir Francis erected a large quadrangular stone pillar 92 feet high, on the top of which stood an octagonal lantern, and this was reached by an inside spiral staircase. The main Lincoln to Sleaford track, running through furze-covered heathland, was roughly marked and badly repaired, making travel by night rather hazardous. The pillar with lighted lantern was of great benefit to travellers, and is a good example of the interest shown by Sir Francis for the welfare of the public. The pillar survived until the Second World War, when the greater part of it was dismantled as a precaution against aircraft. All the stones were carefully numbered, and they are still waiting to be reassembled. This sketch shows Dunstan Pillar as it originally existed. Travelling further north from Lincolnshire, another interesting connection with the Dashwood fraternity is revealed. On the edge of the North Yorkshire moors is the village of Skelton and its ancient castle, which in 1733 was inherited by John Hall Stevenson, one of the less popular members of the Medmenham Brotherhood. Stevenson was very envious of Dashwood's successful club at Medmenham, and this prompted him to form his own club, the Demoniacs. It was here, at Skelton Castle, renamed by Stevenson as Crazy Castle, that the Demoniacs met. But the club was only a feeble imitation of Dashwood's successful brainchild, and never attracted members of much influence or notability. The only member worthy of mention in connection with the Demoniacs Club is Lawrence Sterne, author and lifelong friend of Stevenson. It is thought that Sterne was the driving force behind the club and its meetings. At Merryworth, Kent, there is another castle linked with Sir Francis Dashwood. In August 1762, John Fane, 7th Earl of Westmoreland, Baron Le Despencer, died, leaving Merryworth Castle to his nephew, Sir Francis Dashwood. The title, Baron Le Despencer, Premier Baronet of Great Britain, was held in abeyance after John Fane's death, and was called out by Act of Parliament in Dashwood's favour. Associated with Merryworth Estate is the Church of St. Lawrence. Sir Francis Dashwood's influence is evident in its construction. In common with the Church of St. Lawrence at Merryworth, West Wickham Church also bears the same name. Between 1751 and 1763, Sir Francis Dashwood rebuilt West Wickham Church, on top of which he added a large golden ball with seating accommodation for about 8 people. It was within its confines that Sir Francis would entertain his associates in complete privacy, drinking a mysterious alcoholic beverage known as the Divine Milk Punch. John Wilkes described the ball as the finest Globe Tavern he was ever in. There is a similar globe on the Customs House in Venice, which must have caught Dashwood's eye during his European tour, and the memory of this inspired him to build the ball on West Wickham Church. Charles Churchill described the Church of St. Lawrence as a temple built aloft in air that serves for show and not for prayer. John Wilkes said that it was built for a prospect to enhance the view from Dashwood's estate. Mrs. Philip Libby Powys, a fashionable lady of the period who visited the church on the 12th of May 1767, described its interior as a fine concert or ballroom, much like an Egyptian hall, giving one not the least idea of a place sacred to religious worship. On the ceiling in the chancel is Giuseppe Borni's well-known painting of the Last Supper. The eyes of Judas Iscariot, which dominates the painting, create the most eerie effect of always appearing to follow the observer. In 1773, Sir Francis Dashwood, in conjunction with his close friend Benjamin Franklin, scientist and joint postmaster of the American colonies, revives the Book of Common Prayer for the Church of England. This example of Dashwood's public spirit was, in the words of Franklin, to prevent the old and the faithful from freezing to death through long ceremonies in cold churches, to make the services so short as to attract the young and the lively, and to relieve the well-disposed from the affliction of indeterminable prayers. When George Bubb Donington, Lord Melcombe Regis, died in 1762, he left in his will £500 to Sir Francis for building an arch, temple, column, or an additional room to house his ashes. This unusual piece of architecture, built in 1765 just east of the church, was Dashwood's interpretation of Donington's request, and is known today as a mausoleum. The building also contains urns and memorials to Dashwood's family and his close friends. Paul Whitehead was Dashwood's most devoted friend. When Whitehead died in 1774, he left his heart to Dashwood, together with £50 for the purchase of a marble urn. The heart was placed in the urn, but was later stolen by a souvenir hunter in 1839. The memorial to Giuseppe Borni can also still be seen, and that of Dr. Thomas Thompson, physician to Frederick, Prince of Wales. But it was the passing of Paul Whitehead that caused the most distress to Sir Francis. In August 1775, Paul Whitehead's urn was carried up West Wickham Hill to the mausoleum with full pomp and ceremony. All the villagers turned out to view the spectacular procession, which was headed by the Bucks militia. The road from West Wickham to High Wycombe was a deeply rutted lane, which in bad weather became almost impassable. There were instances of carriages overturning. The agreement refers to a new road built by Sir Francis, yet another illustration of his social conscience. From 1748 there had been a series of poor harvests, causing great poverty to the farm workers and their families. Sir Francis declared, "My sole reason for making the road is the welfare of the villagers." He paid the men a shilling a day, an average wage. It is estimated that 150 men were found employment. 2/3 dug chalk from West Wickham Hill, and the rest built the road. This column, costing £27 7 shillings and 8pence, was erected to celebrate the completion of the road in 1752. The diagram represents a series of subterranean passages beneath West Wickham Hill, excavated for Sir Francis Dashwood, and the chalk from these excavations was used to make the West Wickham Road. But which was the prime consideration in Dashwood's mind? The new road to provide employment for the villagers, or the elaborate cave system which would serve as a bizarre venue for the Brotherhood? When the Medmenham activities were made public in Johnston's Kreisel, sightseers travelled upriver in order to witness the awesome spectacle of monks and nuns frolicking in the abbey grounds. This adverse publicity contributed to the break-up of Medmenham in 1763, and with the exception of a few meetings there after that time, it is almost certain that the Brotherhood met 6 miles away under West Wickham Hill in complete seclusion. The cave entrance, designed to resemble a ruined Gothic church, gives it a rather sinister appearance. A low vaulted passage leads northward deep into West Wickham Hill. Its cold, damp atmosphere is dominated by an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional drip of moisture from the ceiling. Some of the original pick marks can still be seen in parts of the cave system. Within a short distance from the entrance, and to the right of the passage, is the robing room, where it is thought that the brothers changed into red monks' habits before proceeding further into the caves. About a third of the way between the robing room and a small network of passages called the catacombs, the Roman numerals 22F can be seen, cut deeply, high in the left-hand wall.
Do these marks have any significance? We know the Roman numerals 34 were visible until a few years ago in the catacombs. Could both sets of figures be measurement marks? There's a village rhyme dated about 1790 given to the Dashwood family by an old lady of West Wickham, but unfortunately she could remember only 3 lines. Take 20 steps and rest a while, then take a pick and find a stile, where once I did my love beguile. Another source has this verse: 'Twas 22 in Dashwood's time, perhaps to hide this cell divine, where lay my love in peace sublime. The poem was said to have had 6 verses. These 2 that remain are somewhat obscure, to say the least. Why should one take a pick to find a stile? Mr. Melford, an authority on village legends, has suggested that the word stile, as well as having the meaning we know today, can also be used to describe a vertical piece in a panelled door, a secret panel. Is there a secret cell or panel as yet undiscovered? I think that the rhyme and the mysterious marks 22F must point to this conclusion. Let's leave this riddle for the moment and continue our journey under West Wickham Hill.
Our journey takes us past the statue of Benjamin Franklin, who visited the caves in 1772. This small group of interweaving passages is known as the catacombs. This vast chamber, measuring 40 feet wide and 50 feet high, is a banqueting hall and is the largest man-made chalk cavern in the world. 4 alcoves in the surrounding wall served as cells, possibly for the monks' private devotions. Until recently, there was a hook in the ceiling where a lamp used to hang, probably the Rosicrucian lamp used at the Georgian Vulture. In 1973, 7 old coins were found concealed in the banqueting hall, 2 of which were dated 1754. If these were hidden to mark the completion of the cave, excavation work must have continued after the road was completed in 1752. Just past the banqueting hall, there is a steep downward gradient to a junction where the passage divides, later rejoining to form a triangle. After the triangle, the buttery is reached, and it is thought that this oval-shaped chamber housed the wine bins. We are now entering the inner temple, which terminates the cave system. Access is only possible by crossing the River Styx, which in Sir Francis Dashwood's time was a large stream and could only be crossed by a small boat especially moored for the purpose. It was here, 300 feet below the surface of West Wickham Hill, nearly a quarter of a mile from the cave entrance, that the Brotherhood met in complete seclusion, and the village maidens said goodbye to their innocence.
Nobody knows for certain what events took place in the inner temple, as most of the club's records were destroyed, some deliberately, some accidentally. One reference we do have is a poem of the late 18th century by the little-known poet John Hall Stevenson. Where can I find a cave to muse upon his lordship's envied glory? Which of the 9 dare to refuse to tell the strange and recent story? Mounting, I saw the egregious lord, o'er all impediments and bars. I saw him at Jove's council bars. I saw him stuck among the stars. It is thought that the 9 refers to members of the inner circle, and the stars to the nuns. I will leave you to draw your own conclusions about the rest of it. Let us turn our attention again to that short length of passage between the catacombs and the banqueting hall. We are heading for the banqueting hall, and as we leave the catacombs, we see on the left of the main passage a small cave, which contains 2 wax figures of children representing Sir George Dashwood and his sister, Mrs. Brockley. What is striking, although barely visible on the film, is the evidence of steps. Carved in chalk, they ascend, then end abruptly. One can just discern them at the base of the figures. Strangely enough, steps exist nowhere else in the caves. If these steps continue in a straight line, they would head in the direction of the mausoleum and church. It is a well-known fact that a pagan altar existed on top of West Wickham Hill, probably where the church now stands. Under the altar was a pagan catacomb. If we assume that the caves are part of the original pagan network, then I think it is safe to say that the catacombs were connected to the altar. I am of the opinion that the fragments of steps remaining mark the end of this passage, long since, for some reason or other, blocked. In a poem entitled The Duellist, Charles Churchill wrote this strange verse, which gives even more evidence in favour of this theory. Under the temple lay a cave made by some guilty, coward slave, whose actions feared rebuke, a maze of intricate and winding ways, not to be found without a clue. One passage only, known to few, in paths direct, led to a cell, where fraud in secret loved to dwell, with all her tools and slaves about her, nor feared lest honesty should rout her. I was now convinced that if excavation, which is out of the question, were possible, the secret passage would come to light. Luckily, I was introduced to Mr. Dennis Wright of Marlow, who has had extensive experience of detecting underground irregularities by the aid of divining rods.
With the use of accurate maps and accurate compasses, it was possible to plot above ground the exact geographical position of the block's secret passage outlet near the catacombs. Knowing that the passage leads in the direction of the church, a straight imaginary line dissecting the mausoleum was plotted above ground between the catacombs and the church. Using the divining rods, almost exactly the same result was achieved, and the course was indicated by flags. Very near to the church, the estimated depth of the passage was 18 feet below the surface. As a pagan catacomb existed under West Wickham Hill before Sir Francis Dashwood's time, it is reasonable to assume that the catacombs was approached through what is now the secret passage. It was then Dashwood's intention to expand the existing pagan network. Manually transporting vast quantities of excavated chalk to the surface would have posed a tremendous problem, owing to the length and steep incline and limited headroom of the passage. Another means of removing the quarried chalk to the surface was required, and this was achieved by cutting a more direct route to the front and south face of West Wickham Hill. This geographical position was made the cave entrance and remains so today. Having established the new outlet, Sir Francis was then in a better position to excavate the banqueting hall and the rest of the cave system. When his scheme was completed, the original secret passage was sealed off, terminating in a wooden secret panel near the catacombs. This may sound incredible, but Sir Francis had the resources to panel the entire cave network, and the secret panel would surely have been inconspicuous. Whilst on the subject of the caves, it's very curious that in Marlow there's another cave system very close to a house once owned by Bordney, the Italian artist. A low vaulted passage follows a very straight course for 50 yards and, owing to recent subsidence, ends abruptly. It is thought that beyond the blockage, the tunnel extends even further into the chalk hillside. A site for the celebration of the Black Mass, or as an alternative meeting place for the Brotherhood, are amongst the many reasons given for the excavation of the Borney Cave at Marlow. But none of these theories can be substantiated by documentary evidence. Finally, also connecting the Baldney family is another puzzling piece of information. A descendant of Giuseppe Baldney has in his possession a small badge believed to have been associated with the Brotherhood. It bears the Latin inscription Homo Memento Mori. In other words, man, remember that you must die. An author by the name of Sir Max Pemberton, whilst researching on the Brotherhood, has seen documentary evidence that the following rule of conduct had been laid down in the club's constitution. For the safeguarding of our honour, it shall be decreed that any brother who draws his sword upon another in the name of a woman shall by his own hand pay forfeit for his life before 24 hours have passed. It is obvious that strict rules of this nature would be necessary where jealousies may arise, and one can imagine that during the club's meetings the brothers wore this badge as a warning of the consequences if the rule was to be contravened.
In November 1781, Dashwood, whose health was failing, made one final attempt to visit Italy, the country that had haunted him all his life. His old friend Dr. Benjamin Bates came over from Aylesbury, and together they made plans for the journey. But it was not to be. On the 11th of December 1781, Sir Francis Dashwood passed away, and his body interred in the family vault at West Wickham Church. He was a poor chancellor, but an excellent postmaster. He was an inveterate showman and a religious man, satirizing only what he considered cant and humbug. He revised the Book of Common Prayer and drew up a plan of reconciliation that would have kept America within the British Empire. So passed the greatest of that strange company of men, who for a few years held within their grasp the destiny of the world.
This time of night, in the eerie presence of the mausoleum, I find it very easy to conjure up the atmosphere of the mysterious past. From the top of West Wickham Hill I will leave you. There seems to be very little more to be said on the enigmatic brotherhood. In the words of Thomas Langley, after many inquiries, I believe all their transactions may as well be buried in oblivion.